Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to the fourth presentation of our 2023 Sea Otter Science Symposium. This talk is entitled Learning to Live with New Old Neighbors, Anecdotal Observations from a Coastal Mariner Learning How to Share Space with Sea Otters. So sea otters were reintroduced to Canada's BC coast between 1972 and 1979. Since then, the initial 89 individuals have flourished in their traditional territories, and their descendants have recolonized much of Canada's west coast. For the first time since fur trade hunting days, coastal humans are having to share their habitat and their resources with sea otters. Tiare Boyes is a second-generation commercial fish harvester, underwater scuba guide, and videographer, and is among the first generation in almost a century learning to live and work alongside these marine mammals. During 21 years working at sea, Tiare has witnessed firsthand what marine environments look like before and after sea otters have moved back into the neighborhood. She has a master's in marine resource management, is a commercial diver, an underwater camera operator and photographer, and an ocean plastics artist. Russell Clark is a natural history filmmaker based in British Columbia who specializes in communicating underwater environments for international audiences. He will be talking about the importance of responsible storytelling, the difficulties of working with wildlife, and why it is harder than ever to get people to take notice of what's actually on their doorstep. So with that, I want to introduce our two speakers, Tiare and Russell, and I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Bob. I'm going to go first. I'm just going to share my screen here, and then I will have Russ come up and finish off our hour. Okay, so my presentation is all about new old neighbors. I think Bob gave a very fulsome introduction of myself, so I won't reiterate any of that. I think what's relevant for this talk is that I am among the first generation of coastal humans who are learning to live alongside sea otters in almost a century. Otters are moving back into our neighborhoods, and humans are having to learn to live with these new but also old neighbors after generations of living without. The reintroduction of sea otters is, of course, a complex process and one that must involve meaningful consultation with First Nations and with coastal communities. Now, I want to start this off with some disclaimers. This is not a scientific presentation, nor my observation scientific in any way. I'm merely speaking from my anecdotal and personal experience working on the waters off the northern tip of Vancouver Island. So all the photos of marine mammals in this presentation are also taken with zoom lenses, and they're heavily cropped to keep the required distance from marine mammals. And I also want to reiterate that I'm not involved in fisheries that rely on sea otters' favorite foods, namely bivalves, crustaceans, or urchins. And I don't represent the views of any other fishermen other than myself. And my ancestors come from Europe. So I wish to underline, I absolutely don't represent any First Nations perspective. I'm just somebody who lives on the coast. So that out of the way, Bob alluded to this, and our other speakers previously have gone through it, but I'm going to reiterate again that in British Columbia, Canada, sea otters were hunted to what was considered local extinction by about 1929. And after decades of that fur trade, otters were pretty much wiped out in this area of the coast. Beginning in 1969 and continuing over the span of a few years, those 89 individuals were reintroduced to New Chalmette territory in Chesapeake Bay from populations up in Alaska. Not all the otters survived, but those who did thrived. Now, I can't speak from personal experience because I wasn't there when the otters were reintroduced or when the decisions were made to reintroduce the otters. But what was reportedly lacking in this reintroduction scheme was consultation and impact on First Nations and other coastal communities. From what I understand, the Canadian and US governments were acting to combat the erosion of biodiversity on the North American coast, and the conservation acts in both countries that followed didn't account for coastal communities being a part of those marine ecosystems. So the introduced sea otters thrived, and their populations, the population growth between 1977 and 1995 was almost 19% on Vancouver Island. They were once considered threatened under the Canadian Species at Risk Act, and they've since been downgraded to a less at-risk status as a species of special concern, and they have spread up and down the coast. And as we know, they're a keystone species, and their presence or absence can trigger dramatic changes. So this is my family's fishing boat. I spent the last 2 decades working with my family at sea. We harvest wild Pacific halibut with hook and line gear in the spring, and then we spend the rest of the summer working as a chartered research vessel for the International Pacific Halibut Commission and the Department of Fisheries and Oceans Canada. Being a commercial fish harvester for me goes hand in hand with being a conservationist and fighting for sustainable harvest policies so that we can address food insecurity, respect our marine resources, and ensure that we meet the nutritional needs of today without sacrificing those of future generations. In the wild Pacific halibut fishery, we have 100% at sea and dockside monitoring, and we are 100% accountable for our actions at sea. Each fish is marked with an individual barcode so that it can be traced back to the harvesters. And yeah, we're quite proud of a lot of the initiatives that we have in our fishery. So we set sail from Comox, which is about halfway up Vancouver Island, and we fish in the waters off Hecate Strait and Queen Charlotte Sound, which is just to the south of Haida Gwaii and just north of Vancouver Island. I provide this background information because this just lets you know, I spend a lot of time in this area and interacting with the marine ecosystem. So we fish in deep waters. Halibut are a deep water species, and our fishing grounds and our species don't overlap with sea otters, but other fisheries do. When I first started fishing in this area, we never saw a sea otter. It was rare and always thrilling to see. But this year we spotted several in the middle of Hecate Strait and Queen Charlotte Sound and just in the waters off Haida Gwaii. It's very exciting. Now here's a little map of British Columbia, a chart of British Columbia. And you can see circled in blue here is Chesapeake Bay in Newchalmouth territory where those sea otters were introduced. And I spend, when I'm not working at sea on my family's boat, I spend a significant portion of the year working at a dive lodge called God's Pocket, which is near Browning Passage, which is just at the tip of the blue arrow there. And you can see this figure is from 2008, which is just before I started working there. And the sea otter range, which is indicated in red, had not quite reached this area. So when I started diving regularly in this area over a decade ago, there was very few, if none, no sea otters in this area. Now, this area, the waters around the northern tip of Vancouver Island, where Browning Pass is located, they're thickly forested, both above and below the high tide line. The kelp forests in the cold water are abundant, with 2 of the most common species being Nereocystis luciana, or bull kelp, and Macrocystis pyrifera, or giant kelp. The areas around Browning Passage is the traditional territory of the Gwasala Nawakta and the Kwagutl and the Tlatlasikala First Nations, who have been stewards of this land since time immemorial. Sea otters, as I said before, and how we all know, they're a keystone species, so their presence can shift ecosystem dynamics. Generations of humans on our coast have grown up without sharing space, and we're now learning to live with these new old neighbors. It's affecting the communities who rely on the ocean for their substance and for their livelihoods. So why dive in Browning Pass? Why do I spend so much time here? The reason that there is a dive lodge here, and because I spend so much time here, is because Browning Passage is sort of at a perfect angle so that it receives all of the open ocean currents, and that deep water hits the continental shelf and it mixes with surface waters, and it creates this really nutrient rich area. Encrusting life, like bright red soft corals and bright yellow sulfur sponges and acorn barnacles, they proliferate in this passage. And there's areas where you can dive where you can't put down a single finger. There's just so much life there. And then of course, all of this encrusting life and invertebrate life, it provides a lot of resources for vertebrate life. So we have huge schools of rockfish, many different species of rockfish, wolf eels, giant Pacific octopus, all sorts of just really incredible, colorful cold water species. The diving here is challenging because of those very strong currents, but it is absolutely incredible, definitely worth it. So the lodge depends on the healthy ocean ecosystem for its business. Without these thriving ecosystems, there'd be no great diving and there wouldn't be a lodge. So of course, we're very interested in the local ecosystem dynamics, and our livelihood depends on those ecosystems. And understanding the patterns is very important to us, because of course, in order to dive in this area, we have to be able to read the local conditions and currents. And so we spend a lot of time studying and living and working in these areas. So as I said before, when I first started working in this area, sea otters were almost unheard of. And there was lots of Dungeness crabs around. We used to have lots of delicious dinners. But gradually we started seeing more and more otters, which delighted our guests and myself alike. I consider myself a pretty salty mariner, having worked on the ocean for most of my life. But there's something about sea otters that's just at least 20% more adorable than other marine life. And yeah, I know they have darker sides, but I still consider them one of the most adorable animals in the ocean. So we did start seeing the otter more frequently. And of course, first the males moved in. You can see this otter on the rock there. It's one of the first males that we started noticing on a daily basis. We nicknamed him Charlie, and it's one of the only otters who started living in this biodiverse and biodense area. He had access to a 24/7 all-you-can-eat seafood buffet, and he developed a distinctly Rubenesque form as he reclined on his seemingly favorite rock, and it was always a delight to see him. And then the females started moving in with their young, and we started seeing rafts of first dozens and then hundreds of sea otters. I think the biggest change I saw underwater that immediately coincided with the return of the otters, but I want to highlight here, let's remember, correlation does not imply causation, was a prevalence of holes dug in the sandy sediment on some of our dives. You can see these are two photos of these pits that have been dug in the sandy sediment on some of the dive sites that we frequent. This was in about 2018, 2019, and I had been diving here every year, same dive sites, and I know the sites very well. It's my job to know the sites very well, and it was really fascinating to see these changes happen in real time. So these pits kind of made some of our sandy sediment dive sites look sort of like a lunar landscape. There was pits everywhere. And of course, these were areas where there was lots of bivalves and, horse clams, squid-ducks, and other species. And another thing I noticed was a lot more clamshells, fresh clamshells scattered around the bottom. So again, I'm not working as a scientist. These are not scientific observations, and perhaps these pits were dug by other marine creatures. I'm not entirely sure. But it was really fascinating to see sort of the networks of benthic life, the marine worms, and the other things that live in subsediment. So another change that we witnessed was perhaps the thickness of the kelp forests. For the past few years, the route that we take with our dive boat between the lodge and the dive sites, it's a route we take 4 times a day for 7 months of the year. It's becoming increasingly obstructed by kelp patches that are thicker than we've seen in many years, which is really cool. Now, I do want to highlight that The kelp forests in this area have not seen the decline like they have in other areas of the coast. And since I've been diving here, there's always been an abundance of kelp. So it's not like this kelp is just springing up out of nowhere. But we certainly, I think it's safe to say we've seen an increase in the kelp beds. Bull kelp is my personal favorite brown algae in the whole world, besides being stunningly gorgeous. As many of you know, kelp is important habitat for marine species, especially juvenile species. They provide a buffer against coastal erosion, and they provide nutrition for a lot of coastal species. We also saw an increase in the prevalence of Macrocystis pyrifera, or giant kelp. We often see sea otter mothers wrapping their babies up in these strong fronds and leaving them safely tucked in while they go forage for food. So I believe we are seeing a shift in species composition in Browning Pass that coincides with the return of sea otters, and perhaps one that aligns with patterns in other areas. Today, after a few years of sea otters in residence, their prey are becoming less available. And as a result of their prey, the prey of the prey is becoming more abundant. So like we've heard in other areas, less urchins, more kelp, other dynamics like that. And of course, these dynamics are not linear and they're very complex. So today we can no longer rely on our crab traps for dinner. There's almost no crabs in the area. And like with any changes, there's trade-offs. And these trade-offs are more significant for the people who rely on near coastal waters for their subsistence and livelihoods. Also in the area, there's also a healthy population of coastal wolves. And on the islands around Browning Passage, you can hear them howling at night, and we spot them all the time foraging in the intertidal zone, and occasionally we see them swimming between islands. These packs are basically marine mammals themselves. They get the majority of their diet from the ocean, and they're very strong swimmers, and they island hop quite frequently. And last year when I was hiking on Hearst Island, I came across a pile of wolf scat, which is very common, but it had an octopus beak in it, which was very cool, and I got very excited about it. So I wonder if their diet will start to include sea otters, like has been observed in other areas. So I think my biggest takeaway from this is that I have many questions and almost no answers. As divers, as I said before, it's always a special treat to see giant Pacific octopus in wolf eels. We have guests and film crews that travel from all over the world to experience and to film in these areas. A lot of the nature documentaries you see. And I wonder what the effect sea otter abundance will have on octopus and wolf eels who share the same favorite foods, and they can also be prey for otters. I've read that sea otter, the species, is a density dependent species, and their population growth is ultimately regulated by resource availability. So I wonder if the otters will eventually move on to richer sea pastures. We'll see less abundance, and maybe spread more south. I wonder what the impacts on the local coastal communities and fisheries are as they expand their range into more population dense areas. I wonder if they're going to colonize down Johnson Strait, which is the strait between Vancouver Island and the mainland of British Columbia, all the way to waters off Hornby and Denman. I've been involved in some kelp restoration projects there, and I wonder if they'll help return kelp forests to these areas by keeping some of the urchin populations in check. I'd love to have a detailed study and more answers than I do to better understand the dynamics of the recolonization of sea otters, but I think I'll leave that to the other experts in the symposium. You guys are doing great work, and it's fascinating to hear of your research. So for now, all I can do is dive, observe, and try and be a good neighbor. So I want to say thank you to everybody for your time, and I will introduce my good friend and dive buddy, Russ, who is going to be taking over. Russ is a very excellent human, and he is a natural history and documentary filmmaker based in British Columbia. He specializes in water stories. So he has recently won a Jackson Wild Award about for a film about tadpoles. He has multiple other documentary short awards, and more recently he has Emmy Award nomination for his work on Netflix's Island of the Seawolves. He's currently working on a new international natural history show that I can't wait to see. And he is also an explorer and a fellow of the Royal Canadian Geographic Society. The most recent expedition he led with RCGS was with Jill Heiner to Newfoundland, where a team of divers, including himself, documented World War II wrecks and Canadian and US World War II wrecks. And before that, Russell had an extensive career in magazine publishing, producing award-winning work for Disney and David Attenborough. He's had a very rich media industry career, and I can't wait to hear from him.
Okay, thanks, T. Okay, let's see if I can get this little thing all working. Whoops, sorry. Okay, thanks, T. That's great. I've been lucky enough to work with Tiare on a few film projects, magazine articles, and that expedition from last year. Yeah, she's the only person I know that has a favorite type of brown kelp, so I think that's pretty cool. She invited me to the symposium today, and it's really interesting. So thank you to everybody for your hard work, and to the Alliance also for hosting this event and just bringing everybody together. I generally put a lot of effort into staying behind the camera, so I don't really have many images that relate specifically to what I'm going to talk about. So I'm just going to show you some pretty images instead, and hopefully that keeps your attention. I've worked in many different areas of the media, from newspapers and magazines to balancing on the edge of a cliff, filming baby eagles for TV, and everything in between. And media has become a rather, polarizing industry of late, but I still believe that it plays a vital part in the protection of our underwater forests and ecosystems. In my opinion, it's as vital a part as any other part of the protection process. In its most sort of basic distilled form, if people don't know something exists, then they can't understand it. And if they can't understand it, they're not going to learn about it. And if they don't learn about it, they're ultimately not going to care about it. And my role as a natural history filmmaker is really to be a bridge between, the researchers and the academics and the public. We kind of connect the two. We take that research and those facts and that data, and we pepper it into dramatic storylines to create emotional reactions. And our job as photographers and writers and filmmakers is to simply make people care. That's all we really want to do. That is our end goal. And we do this by finding dramatic moments in, behavioral or environmental, and then we turn it up to 11. We want you to watch the otters in Island of the Seawolves and, be really concerned for little Rocky, the little baby otter. We want to see your eyes well up with tears. It's that level of caring that will make the public take those next steps, which is where conservation organizations play their part of, that vital role. My job as a filmmaker has taken me into some, very interesting and unusual and stunning ecosystems all around the world. And for me, the underwater forests of British Columbia are some of the most spectacular by far. There's really nothing quite like it. But I don't think people really know these forests exist. We do. Everyone watching this talk does. A lot of conservationists, wildlife lovers, commercial fishermen like Tiare and her family. But I bet my bottom dollar that 99% of the planet couldn't tell you what an underwater forest is, or, how important they are, or even where they are. Living here in the Pacific Northwest, we're surrounded by the ocean, but so few people have that personal connection with it. They really have no idea what lays, at their own doorstep. They can't visualize that those mountains that we see, here, they continue below the waterline. And like the mountains above the water, they're also covered in forests teeming with life. And I believe kelp forests should be one of the planet's most talked about and acted upon areas of conservation, but realistically, it's probably the exact opposite. They're one of the less talked about areas, at least, here in the West. Some countries like South Korea have, entire sort of cultures built around sea forests and sea farming, and there's a lot to be learned there from, by us.
Hey, Russ, can I just jump in?
Yeah.
We're not seeing any photos or anything if you were supposed to be sharing your screen.
Yeah, okay.
I didn't want to jump in there, but I just want to make sure that people are seeing what you're talking about. Aha.
Are you seeing that?
Yes. Okay. Beautiful. Okay, great.
Okay, well, there's the first picture. There's the second picture. There's a little otter. And there's the last one. Thank
Okay.
you.
No worries.
As storytellers, we need to help increase the personal connection people have with the ocean. We need them to really feel for it. Even if they're in a city or landlocked, we need to create those interrelationships. Only then will we be able to make the difference to the extent that we desperately need to. And filmmakers, photographers, writers, poets, ocean plastic artists, and as much as it pains me to say, even social media influencers can all play a really important part here. If we work with researchers, academics, conservationists, government authorities, we can use educational, entertaining, and inspiring stories to really facilitate change. And it's a lot of pressure if you care about it properly. And if you don't, we tend to get inaccurate information that can actually do more harm than good. As Peter Parker once said, with great power comes great responsibility, and everyone now has, a mind-boggling amount of power, to communicate with people all around the world just in their pocket. So we really have to sort of push ourselves to do a little bit better and be a little bit more responsible. We need to be very careful more than ever what we do communicate to people. Nowadays the goal for most people is to produce content, and I use air quotes for that for a very specific reason. It's all about making stuff as fast as possible so it can be consumed like fast food. But like fast food, it's not always good for you or what you need. Accuracy has given way to uninformed opinion, while authenticity has been replaced by the need for recognition. And what we need to do is zoom out. We need to take a step back, take a deep breath, look at the stories we're trying to tell, and take some time to ensure that facts are facts. Make sure that the message we're sending is the right one and it can't be misinterpreted. We need to make sure that we're being responsible as an overall sort of team of people with that one goal in mind. One of the biggest challenges we all face is getting people to spend more time looking right on their doorstep. But this is far from an easy task, and there's certainly no easy solution to this. I've always thought that the best way is just to start locally, start the smallest, easiest way possible, which is just talk to friends, to relatives. Next time you go to the restaurant, talk to the server. You'd be amazed at how many times scuba divers have enthralled restaurant staff with daring tales of their morning underwater shenanigans. Just start small and share your passion, be passionate about it, and people really pick up on that genuineness, and it can be very infectious. And it's one of the most valuable yet underutilized tools we all have, whether you're a filmmaker, a photographer, a researcher, or a conservationist. We need to create community understanding, through public outreach, through social media, film, TV, radio, podcasts, theater, dance, art, anything and everything. We need to start to infiltrate every corner of our culture as much as possible with these ideas that undersea ecosystems are just as important as any other, and that anyone, anywhere can really make a difference. Just the people watching this talk alone, have the power to reach more people than Jacques Cousteau could ever have dreamt of. That's absolutely bonkers. we have to make the ocean and our underwater forests fashionable. And that's a really weird thing to sort of suggest, and I don't even know if I like the idea of it, but it's kind of what it takes for the masses to notice. And in some places in New Zealand, kelp is literally being used for fashion. They're using sort of kelp infused food to drastically reduce methane in Milano wool production that's producing high-end wool suits for fashion lines, and a lot of people are talking about it. Cosmetic companies are getting in on the act. They're farming and harvesting kelp for skincare. And while these industries may be in their early days and not necessarily the route that everybody wants to see it take, it's infiltrating into corners of our culture. It's making itself more present in the West. And it's attracting a lot of people and getting a lot of people talking and caring about things that they normally wouldn't. Movies like Avatar 2 help enormously, as do TV series like Island of the Seawolves. There's still much work for artists and communicators left to do. The question is, can we reduce that disconnect that people have with their oceans before it's too late? And, I certainly don't have the answer to that question, but I know that, we have to try, and people like myself and Tiare, it's something that, we're absolutely compelled to do. And there's a line on the symposium website that says, no matter where you reside, you can make a difference. That is absolutely true. But how do we get kids in the suburbs of Denver, for example, to care about otters and kelp? It's all about long-term investment of time and money into innovative media and communications. That's, certainly a large part of it. And, events like this, these talks, they go a long way into sort of helping that process. I've been lucky enough to film in different environments and countries around the world. And I feel when it comes to a very personal individual basis, North America and the West generally has a less of a connection to the ocean than other countries. Our governments and commercial industries may take a more invested approach than other countries, but on an individual basis, people that live in the Solomon Islands or the corners of Indonesia, they have such a reliance on the ocean every day just to provide their lunch, or just to provide, the smallest of incomes, that they have a more direct link to the oceans. They have a more emotional connection and much more of a fundamental understanding that we really need to cultivate here much more than already exists. So what's it like filming in underwater environments? Well, this is a picture of Tiare here with a camera, and she's working wonders, taking images, but it's challenging. Underwater forests love current, and we have some of the strongest currents and largest tidal exchanges in the world, up here in BC. And when we film for documentaries, we use a lot of large, cinema cameras and specialized camera gear. And these things are huge, and it's like walking out into a tropical storm and putting up an umbrella, and you kind of get whisked away sometimes. So it's it's a lot of fun, but you can also get sometimes engulfed in kelp. So this is a little picture of Tiare, who you can see is I'm not sure if she's trying to get back to her ocean home, or maybe she was sort of born in the kelp, but that's her in a little happy place there. But when all of the elements align, when you get minimal swell, you have no current, you get a bright summer sun shining through the water, it's truly, an absolutely stunning place. And you don't have to spend long in that environment to see how much life thrives there. Then as a filmmaker, your biggest problem is just focusing, just not like daydreaming and looking around at everything. You've got to force yourself to stay on task. I spent a month in Indonesia this year filming for an upcoming series, and this part of Indonesia has what most people regard as the best scuba diving anywhere in the world. But when I sat down and I showed locals photos on my iPad of what it's like in Canada, people are just absolutely stunned. They have no idea that things like this exist here. They think it's cold, dark waters, the same as Washington and Pacific Northwest. They don't realize that we have these strong currents and immense amounts of nutrients in this stunning marine life. They don't realize we have this beauty and the color and the diversity and the abundance of life that we do have. So if we take our time to share these observations, we can really begin to challenge people, and that's always a really interesting and exciting position to be in. But you need a lot of patience. And I'd say that is the most important trait of a wildlife filmmaker, is patience. We use a lot of specialist equipment like camera traps, remotely operated cameras, super long lenses. We have special boat-mounted gimbal stabilizers, so we can film things from hundreds of meters away but get beautiful shots. And we use the best tools to capture the shots that we're looking for, but it all takes time. Time to find the locations, time to find the animals, time to set up the equipment, time to let the environment adjust to you, and also for you to adjust to the environment. And otters can be a challenging, little ones to capture on camera. They're very unpredictable. They're really fast. And of course, they can distract you with their cuteness. I mean, even any seasoned filmmaking professional gets distracted by these cute little ones swimming around. It's all about spending as much time in the area as possible and using as many cameras as possible to increase your chances of capturing those moments that you want. And local knowledge is always key to that. We want to be as non-intrusive as possible, always. The last thing we want as filmmakers is to create a reaction that isn't natural for an animal or an environment. So first and foremost, we're all animal lovers. And secondly, it's being stealthy as possible that helps us achieve our goals as storytellers. So for us, it's all about observing. We watch and we watch and we watch for weeks and sometimes even months. Wind, rain or shine, cold or hot. There's no excuses. In fact, the last dive I done with Tiare was this one, and this was a few weeks back. I literally had to hold on to a piece of kelp for about 20 minutes, and I was just flapping in the current there like a leaf on a tree whilst Tiare gets lost photographing kelp. So yeah, lots of patience. And because of that, because of the patience and the time that we spend, with these specific animals, sometimes we're spending more time with them than anybody else has. And because of that, we really get to notice routines and behaviors and patterns. And sometimes you may even capture a behavior that no one has ever seen before. For Island of the Seawolves, I spent weeks working with remotely operated underwater cameras here on Vancouver Island, and every day I got to see the same otter mum, foraging for her little pup, and she was teaching skills every day to the little pup. And by the end of my time there, the pup was off on his own, and he was diving down, and he was foraging himself. I just saw this amazing, evolution of their learning and their skills, and it was incredible. We saw storms roll in, and the pup would get separated from the mum, and you'd have the mum calling out to the pup, and the pup calling back, and it was just, like this Oscar-winning drama unfolding in front of my eyes for 12 hours a day for weeks on end. It was absolutely remarkable and a unique experience that a lot of people outside of the filmmaking world, will never have the opportunity to do. And filmmakers often give back to researchers. So, a lot of us, will donate our video for research purposes. We'll give anecdotal evidence of the behaviors and, that we've witnessed. And we often, donate financially to the organizations we work with. It can be a real beneficial partnership. And the researchers and academics that, study these species, they're the first people that we reach out to when we research these TV shows and these documentaries. We work with people like everyone watching this. We need those relationships, and we need to make more of them across the world. But one of the questions I was getting asked is, is there any advice for aspiring filmmakers? And while it may be a little bit stating the obvious and a bit annoying, the only advice really is you just got to go do it. Again, smartphones have given us all access to insanely incredible tools now. You don't need a $50,000 cinema camera or $100,000 zoom lens. You can grab a phone or a GoPro and you can go and shoot stuff, and then you can edit and you can share it, and you can reach people all from the comfort of your sofa on an iPhone. It could take a day, a month, a year, but you just got to go do it. And you got to keep it simple, so what do you have access to? So you could tell a story about your day in the day in the life of a marine ecologist, or what are some of the ups and downs of piloting an ROV? Or maybe you've just got a crazy house cat, and he's befriended a little toy otter. Use what you have access to and start simple. Think about your story, keep it genuine. My mum always used to say, write about what you know. So, that's the absolute first place to start. You know, if you want to get into filmmaking or photography or communicating, is just start with what you know and start small and grow from there. Everything you make would be better than the last one in some way. And it's like playing the violin or learning how to be a skateboarder. You just got to keep trying. So film and, you know, TV, magazines, newspapers, websites, social media, everything in between. It's all exceedingly important in the conservation and preservation of our planet's ecosystems. Well, you know, at least it's a part of the solution. So I want to thank everybody here for your tireless work and your efforts. Some of you have probably worked with filmmakers in the past, and on behalf of them, thank you. Your compassion towards species other than our own, you know, is essential. It shows other people, you know, your leaders, and everybody has great stories to tell. You know, everything that we're all doing is one step at a time, but I think if we sort of do work together and can work together, then you know, we have a promising shot at changing the tide, turning things around. So yeah, that's it. Thank you very much. And yeah, Tiare and myself look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Super. Thanks, Tiare and Russ. Loved all your amazing, beautiful photos and stories. It's super fantastic to hear all the work that you're doing and helping with the conservation world of kelp forests, especially. I see, Russ, you're answering Beth's question, but I'll answer it out loud, or okay. I'll ask it out loud. What would you recommend as a decent, affordable, entry-level underwater camera, if such thing exists?
Well, I'd say, you know, easiest options are the GoPro. I mean, it's you can go to Costco, pick one up for, you know, $400 or $500, and, you know, bang for buck, it's by far the best option out there. Or your iPhone, you know, or smartphone. I mean, there's a lot of companies that make little underwater housings for these now. They're relatively inexpensive, and you know, everything on your phone is backed up to the cloud nowadays if anything goes wrong. But you know, it really is just about taking anything and getting out there. So keep it simple, keep it easy, and keep it realistic as well. You know, it's easier to grow and expand over time than it is to, you know, save up $10,000 right off the bat and spend a lot of money on some complicated gear. It's all about the story. It all comes down to the story and the emotion. So that's where you start. A camera is kind of the secondary aspect of it, I guess.
And I'd say site specifically, I think one of the most important things for diving in our corner of the world in the Pacific Northwest is lighting. Underwater lighting is so key. So make sure that you've got a good lighting system along with whatever camera you choose to use, because, you know, you can have a very basic camera, but the lighting is really going to help or hinder you.
Luckily, there's always a teenager on YouTube willing to show you everything these days as well.
That is very true. As a novice underwater photographer, gone through 3 different versions of GoPros now. I will also second that lighting is super duper important. Even scuba diving, I've done a lot of like Caribbean scuba diving, and just bringing a flashlight in on, you know, an invasive lionfish that's hiding underneath a shipwreck is like crazy beautiful. Anyway, okay, super. Tiare, I have one for you. Can you tell us more about, I see a buoy right behind you. Could you tell us more about the awesome artwork you do and how it benefits ocean conservation?
Thank you. Thank you for that question. So I am a marine debris artist, and I take things that are found on beaches or donated to me by fishermen, and I turn them into works of art. So as we all know, humans aren't great neighbors in the sense that we fill our oceans with plastic, and that can be household plastics. But in my case, I can't paint on plastic bags or straws, so I choose to use old fishing buoys, and I paint on them scenes from what I see every day when I'm at work in Brownie Pass or in areas off Vancouver Island. And I provide the story of where the buoys were found, who found them, and what they might have been used for, because I want people to think about where their plastic goes when it might end up in the ocean. I have buoys that I find that come all the way from Japan. I have quite a few from Oregon and Washington, which is really neat. I get their little, tags that show, I won't show the boat, but it shows where they've come from. And so I can kind of track where they've come from, which is really, really cool. And I donate 10% of the proceeds from my sales to marine charities, and any buoys that have an otter on them, I donate to the Alliance.
Great. Thank you so much for that. Okay, Russ, in one of your pictures, it showed a scuba diver looking like it was playing chess with some urchins on a checkerboard. Or I guess checkers on a checkerboard, or chess, whatever you want to say. Is there a story behind that? Where was that taken?
A friendly game of urchin chess. It's a location up here in Discovery Passage in Vancouver, and there's an old shipwreck that used to be one of the passenger ferries between Vancouver and North Vancouver, and it was sunk under mysterious circumstances back in the 60s, and part of that chessboard is actually just a piece of flooring, but for some reason the urchins love it, and it was just a fun off the cuff sort of photo. It's a fun little place, but a lot of areas like that, those urchins are just decimating entire populations of bull kelp especially. So they're definitely sort of changing the underwater vistas that we're sort of seeing there.
Awesome. Thank you. A lot of people are writing in the comments. Thank you for sharing your stories of the sea and your beautiful photos. I've only been diving off of the coast of Oregon once, and it is a lot of swell. And I understand how you can just hold on to some kelp so you don't, leave for 20 minutes. Is there any other, I loved your stories, Russ, of watching the mom and pup over the time period you were filming them go from a pup not knowing how to dive for their food to he was off on his own doing his own thing. Do you have any other similar stories like that with sea otters or any other species that live in the kelp forest ecosystem that you were watching?
I mean, I think the kelp ecosystem always blows me away every time I dive there, because it's just, you always forget how many fish live in them, and the shallower the better, the more natural light the better, and it's just they're just absolutely, they're like the bull kelp and the giant kelp, it is a forest, and it's a really obvious comparison that we all know, but other people don't really make that connection, which is why I like to literally point at someone and say, look at that forest over there, that exists below water, but instead of birds, they're fish. Instead of insects, they're nudibranchs and crabs. And I think just the abundance of stuff that you see down there, like every time, it just sort of blows my mind. And so when you lose those patches of forest, it really is it's a disaster. But I think one of the best examples I saw of an otter was, again, as a mum teaching her pup to sort of to pick sort of oysters and clams, and off of rock mussels, off of rock surfaces, and just watching that little pup kind of learning that he's kind of got fingers, for the first time, and like realizing the amount of dexterity that they actually have, and just being able to sit there and watch that sort of unfold before your eyes it's an absolute privilege. And I went into that series not knowing a huge amount about otters, and I left with them being my new favorite little animal.
That's great. Tiare, I loved your story about finding the wolf scat with the octopus, the octopus beak in there. How wild is that? I totally would have been freaking out too. Just looking at some poop and be like, wow. But I know in Southeast Alaska, they did have wolves predating on sea otters. And there's a lot of speculation about why that's happening. So that's really interesting that you pointed that out as something to be on the lookout for, because it has been occurring in other locations too. Well, I don't see any more questions right now. Oh, hold on, maybe there's one. Let's see, Tiare mentioned learning to live with otters who may be reducing other species that have been important to humans, such as crabs, which have been part of their livelihood. For both of you, any stories of conflicts or resistance to restoring otters and how to handle such discussions? It's kind of a heavy one.
Yeah, I think it's very complex, you know. And again, I don't work in fisheries that directly compete with sea otters. All I can speak is from my personal experience, but there are a ton of stories about how there's conflicts between the return of sea otters and coastal communities that depend on their prey, the same prey, for their livelihood or for their subsistence. And I think we need to be very careful. We need to go slow. We need to make sure that we're talking to everybody and we're listening as well. And that these coastal communities, and especially First Nations, need to be meaningfully consulted when it comes to implementing policies in traditional territories. And I don't have an answer. I don't have any advice. The only advice I can offer is to listen and to make space for people to talk about, you know, their lived experiences and how we might move forward.
Great, thank you. We agree as the Elakha Alliance with all of what you just said too, which is why we're doing lots of research and community outreach to all the coastal communities that might have sea otters in the future, and especially working with our Indigenous people of Oregon as well, which is what we were founded upon by Silet's tribal member. Let's see.
As a fisherman, we're not included in a lot of conversations. We're kind of assumed to be these large corporations, but you know, it's me and my cousin and my dad and a couple of our family friends that go out fishing. So when we're talking about food security, when we're talking about commercial fishing, I really want people to remember that we shouldn't be painted with one brush. There's a lot of stories in the commercial fishing industry, and of course there's a lot of stuff that needs to be worked on. We have a lot of room for improvement, but especially listening to people who spend their lives on the water, to young female fishermen, which is, I'd love to see more people getting involved in these industries. But yeah, just when it comes to food security, when it comes to local food security, seafood is often left off the table and fishermen are often left out of the conversation. And of course, there's a huge participation of First Nations in commercial fisheries. So I just want to put that out there that we need more fishermen being involved in conversations.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. We agree too. Okay, well, I think that is it. So if you have any last words, or if people want to get in touch with you, if there's anything else you'd like to share, please go forward.
I'd say if you've not seen it, you know, Island of Seawolves on Netflix. It's a fun 3-part, you know, nature documentary. It's all on Vancouver Island, but it's a lot of the same stuff you have down where you are, and it's got some really beautiful otter stories in there. And you know, more importantly, it's a great one to tell other people to watch. You know, if you've got friends or family that, you know, want to learn about otters, it definitely gets them emotionally invested, and then hopefully after that they can reach out to you for more information.
Great. I know I have yet to see it. I don't have Netflix, so I have to find someone with a Netflix account. But I've heard only great things, and a lot of people messaged me when that came out and said, "Have you seen the sea otters yet in that documentary?" I was like, "No," but I will watch it now. I will figure out a way to watch it. Okay, great. Well, we have 5 minutes to spare before our next speaker, Lynn Lee. So thank you again, Russ and Tiare, for joining us today. I shared both your websites in the chat for everyone to peruse. And we really appreciate you being here today.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And yeah, it's wonderful to learn from everybody.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for everybody for tuning in. That's